Hello everyone, it's very nice to have you here today. So today I'm going to talk about using FLUXCD to manage both your deployments and cluster infrastructure, more like the GitOps way. FLUXCD is a CNCF graduated project and works with your existing tools, the CI/CD tools like Jenkins, GitHub, GitLab, name it, among others. It's also a multi-tenant, multi-cluster, and multi-cloud that can work with all Kubernetes distributions and most Git providers. So when I talk about multi-tenant, I say like you can onboard several, depending on your definition of a tenant. You can have several people that you, or maybe groups or teams or an environment that you can treat as a tenant. So it can work with multiple, depending with how you have structured your cluster or maybe your organization. When I talk about multi clusters, like you can have more. Most of the big organizations have more than maybe one cluster. They could have cluster for the finance team, cluster for the business, or maybe etc. When I say multi-cloud, we have several clouds in the market. So one group might be using maybe AWS, the other one GCP, Azure, you name it. So Flux supports most of the common clouds that are there. So Flux integrates very well with other third-party tools like Terraform, Kivana, among others, to ensure you not only have full automation but a very secured and reliable solution. Now, why manage your deployment and infrastructure using Flux or the GitOps way? That would be the question you would want to ask yourself. So to start over, like to say like GitOps is a modern approach to managing everything as code, from the infrastructure to network, and more using policy-based approach. So you want whatever is being deployed is following a set of policies, so that's why we define it as a policy based approach. So GitOps also paves the way to automate Kubernetes cluster management and application delivery. It uses Git as a single source of truth. I think that's more like a basic bit of it from its definition, Git. So Git is the single source of truth, single in bold, for declarative application and even infrastructure to build on DevOps. That being said, some of the introduction being said, that I'll jump right into it just to show you how maybe you can arrange your infrastructure. You can manage your clusters, various clusters and infrastructure. In this case, we'll be having two set of repos, or maybe yeah, I'll call them repos, where there will be the ops team or DevOps team who will be managing the infrastructure kind of, and the cluster deployment kind of, and then we'll be having app repos where the developers will be able to be accessing it and managing their manifest, or maybe depending with how your organization or your team is structured. So if I go right to my GitLab as shown here, so this is the root of my GitLab. As you can see, I'm using GitLab for this session. So with this kind of, let me just expand this exactly. So with this kind of setup, as you can see from above the root, we have different folders with different kind of clusters. I just added the one layer, which is pretty not very necessary, but I think it's for this purpose of this demonstration, it will be a bit more straightforward rather than jumping into it. Just to go through the tree of how this repo looks like. This is how our repo looks like. So we have the root, which we are calling FLUXCD FOSDEM 2023, and inside it we are having various clusters. So in this case, we are considering maybe four clusters, like your organization maybe is using the four clusters at a go at some point. So we have the native Kubernetes, that is vanilla Kubernetes. We have OpenShift cluster, we have GCP, we have AWS. You could be also be having maybe Azure or any other cloud cluster provider, AKS that is. When we come to vanilla, in this case, we have clusters. So remember, this is like the provider, or maybe the type of the cluster that we are talking about. And if you have decided to go with the native Kubernetes, you could be having maybe several clusters. Like in this case, we have three clusters. They could be more, they could be less, but depending with your the structure of your organization, here we are considering three. So we have the finance, we have the DevOps, we have the business UAT. In this case, we're considering all of them to be UAT. And the same case we have replicated in the other cloud providers, or maybe the other clusters. So we have clusters, we have in OpenShift, we still have finance, DevOps, business unit, business UAT, GCP, the same up to AWS. I'm moving a bit faster because I'll be more detailed when it comes to AWS cluster. So when you go to AWS clusters, we have the finance UAT. So this is the first cluster. Then we have the DevOps UAT, and we have the business UAT clusters. So we'll not go through all the three. So we consider the business UAT. So this is how you arrange. We are without going to the basic of installation and setup, bootstrapping, and all that, because there is quite some series official in the official documentation of Flux itself. It's having a wide and well explanatory and a very supporting community, which you'll basically be told how to install and set it up. So in this demo, we are more like how best can you uh, m- manage both the application and even the infrastructure using Flux, the GitOps. So let's say we have our cluster, which is a business unit. It's hosted in a AWS cloud using EKS in this case, and it's called unit cluster. So first of all, when you do the first bootstrapping, this one will be created for you by Flux itself. It will be able to, based with the commands that you'll provided, it will know the kind and the types of the bootstrapping, maybe the versions. With the bootstrapping commands that you provide, it will know the versions and the type of the components, the controllers that it's going to install for you. By default, there are around is it four that it install for you, and extra two which are option. You have to really specify if you really need them. So this one, most of the time, you're always advised to not touch. Just let it be. Otherwise, you might change something and then breaks everything. Then on the same level, we have a file by the name tenants. So this is definitely where you'll be telling Flux where are your tenants situated, where like you'll just provide a path, like onboard all these tenants to this cluster. In the same case, this is where you will be able to add or maybe share a path of all the infrastructure that wants to manage in that cluster. So all the infrastructure for this cluster, please load the information from here. Okay, then we go to the tenants file. So remember, under this, we will be providing that path that will be going to this folder tenants. So in my case, I'm considering tenants based on the namespaces, which is a bit easier to define a tenant. Like a namespace can fit in to become a good tenant. And you find in most cases namespaces are always maybe associated to mostly a team or maybe a project. Either way, I think this is a good start when you're defining maybe your tenant. So in our AWS cluster, in this case, we have assuming we are having three namespaces that we want to manage with the Flux CD. So the first one will be finance UAT, DevOps UAT, and business UAT. And with that, under this folder, there is the root two files. One is the tenants patch and customization. So with customization, it's basically we use it for patching and also for synchronizing and maybe checking if there are any errors. And then the tenants patch, this is where you're adding those tenants. You are listing the tenants that customers will use and do the synchronize and maybe deploy to the cluster, synchronize with the cluster basically. So here, this is where you'll provide the path to this base, where maybe the that tenant specific details will be situated. And when we say tenant specific details, these are common details that are maybe associated to these particular tenant. In this case, we say the our tenants is the same as namespace. So this namespace, of course, we have these files, we have the auth. So in our case, assuming that you are dealing with private repos, um, basically an organization with which is a multi-cloud, multi-cluster, multi-tenant, will definitely be using maybe private repos. And most of the all actually of the private repos will require maybe authentication. So this is where you'll be able to define your authentication details. And we'll also be able to define the RBAC details, that is the role binding and other details here, to be able to authenticate or maybe restrict within that namespace. We have a file that is called sync.yaml. So this is where you'll define a Git repository associated to this team, and definitely to be linked to the app repo. So this is where you'll be telling your source, go fetch whatever is written there, tell me whatever it's there, and I need to synchronize. And then we have the team's notification. So it has the notification and the provider. So which provider are you using? Is it Slack? Is it Teams? Is it Discord? There are several providers that Flux integrates with it. So the notification, it's a bit it's important, especially maybe you have critical applications, want to know when the status changes, you want to be informed. So you can use that whenever there's those change. You can equally maybe set up a webhook if you want, and when there's that change, maybe you need to be notified. So it will be sending those notifications based on the changes, whether you put on information kind of notification, is it an error, is it a warning, and all that you specify. As usual, use customize to load the files that you want to synchronize. That's basically the tenants folder. And then the other one is now the infrastructure. Like now you want to manage your infrastructure, right? So in this case, you have, let's go to business unit. So in most of the cluster that you set up, you realize you'll have infrastructure kind of setup. In most of the times when we are not doing the GitOps way, these things are usually done manually or maybe directly on the cluster. So, and most of the time, truth be told, there sometimes might be try and error. So you try yesterday version this and this. Maybe you try with Helm install. You try directly, and at the end of it, with the help of Stack Overflow and other resources out there, one will definitely work. But when tomorrow you're told to replicate that, you find there are always that discrepancy, and it will take time to understand. The same case with things like metric server and other infrastructure things that you always install when you're setting up your cluster for it to work. So the importance of that, we are using Flux to definitely manage that for us. So whatever changes that you make, it is possible for someone to know, and in case there is an issue and they want to roll back, it will be easy, because remember, Git has audit, it has logs, so you'll be able to know what changed and who changed it, and in case there is an issue, and you'll also be able to revert back to the original status that was stable. So that is basically on a high level of how our setup will be. So let me go straight to the code. We see the code, how it is. So we are checking on the business unit. Sorry, so let's start with the cluster. So as I mentioned, these three files are usually done by Flux itself, and as you can see up there you're being given something like a warning: do not edit. There's not much that will affect if, but if you really understand how it's working, you can modify. So maybe things like versions, or maybe actually do not change version just like that until you understand, because you have to understand there are few versions that are not compatible. You have to be very careful and read which version you're going to use. But there are small things like in case like logging, kind of, you can change it, you can change their values. Maybe it has been put on on only info, and you just want to log things that are only errors and stuff. So these two files comes with the three files, sorry, comes with the when you're bootstrapping the cluster. Yes, so the file that you'll add, basically we start with the tenants. As I mentioned, this is generally how you'll actually create a Git repository and provide a path to where the tenants are loaded. So you just put all the tenants, but uh, in this cluster in one folder. So when I want to go and modify or maybe check all the tenants, I'll be able to just go to the tenants direct. All clusters in one folder. Tenants, one folder. Infrastructure, another folder. So it becomes easy for anyone to come and maybe modify or maybe support something when I'm not around, or when someone is not around. As you can see here, these we are using soaps for our encryption. So you have to add it here when you want to encrypt all your secrets. So this is more like you are managing everything, the GitOps. So it means you're equally even storing your secrets on Git. So in case your cluster goes down here now and it's beyond maybe being restored, because even clusters has its way of healing and stuff. But on a worst case scenario, it's totally down and there's nothing you can do. It's beyond maybe your reach or maybe your ability. It's You can easily maybe spin up another cluster as a backup, and just redirect it and bootstrap that cluster with using Flux and with this repo, and everything will be spin up immediately and the synchronization will start. The same case with the infrastructure. As you can see, we are just providing the path. We have the intervals for after how long would you want this customization to try and check if there is any change, and then we're setting the prone to true, so for garbage collection. So if something has been removed from Git, just remove it from the cluster. Also, let's not have things that we don't need from there. So that is with the cluster. Let's go to tenants. So with tenants, as I said, we have the tenants patch. So you just create a patch as simple as this. So if you have several tenants that you've onboarded, you just add the files like this on this one file. So you can have several like this. So maybe, like for example, we have business team, we have finance team, we have DevOps team. You add them here, and Flux will be customers will be able to uh, patch them and reconcile. And then you have to add them also here. So our resources are under the file base, and this is the folder for business UAT team 1, business UAT team 2, business UAT team 3. Basically, I told you, like a team in my case is more like a tenant. I consider it like a tenant, right? And then on the patch strategy, you're using patch strategic merge. We are adding the file that will be used to do the merging, right? So when you go to base, currently we only have one tenant. In this case, we have the several files as I explained earlier, and the first one is actually auth. As you can see, this is an very encrypted secret. Basically, it's just username and password for our app repo, which is a private repo. So you're authenticating it with the username and password. If maybe you have only a secret, a token, you can equally encrypt it. And in this case, we're using Mozilla Sops. So Mozilla Soap is a bit secure because it's having a um, the key you it uses key to encrypt these passwords or maybe secrets, and Flux itself will be able to use the same key to decrypt it and do the synchronization. So unless you have the key, you will not be able to decrypt this file. The other, I'll jump this. The other one is the RBAC file. So here you're defining maybe the namespaces, the service account you use, and the kind of role binding that are going to you want to create for your within for your namespace and your service account. So that is with the RBAC. Then we have the sync. With this sync, we are defining Git repository and a customization kind. And in the repository, you are now giving or telling Flux where the app repo is. So you have to give it a full path of where the app repo is. This kind of separation or maybe isolation is very important, especially when you're working with teams that various teams. One maybe, and other people will want privacy. They don't want You don't want team A to access what team B is doing. So that kind of tenant isolation is very, very important, and Flux v2 helps you to do that. So with the Git repository, it supports GitHub and very other different types of sources, even S3 bucket, Bitbucket, and many others. And each how they work, it's very well documented. So you define the app repo, you give it an interval. You want it to be checking after every 1 minute, and even which branch. So it doesn't just watch everything. You select the branch that you want it to be watched. Then you do the customization. You create a customization that will be doing those synchronization, the description. Remember, we have an encryption, so for it to be able to decrypt that file, I mean, for it to be able to access this repository, it will need some kind of authentication, and that authentication is already encrypted. So you have to tell it how to what to use to decrypt your file, right? So then we have the team's notification. So this is where you are creating an alert, and telling it, sorry, this one I've named it DevOps. Is supposed to be business team, not DevOps team. So here under the alerts, you're going to tell it what kind of the events you want. You see, like the event severity, currently it's on info. It means it will give you most of everything that's happening in real time. You might want to maybe get notified when things goes bad. You don't want to have too many notifications until maybe you may spam them. It might spam your inbox and you'll start ignoring their notifications. And then you tell it the kind of the events you want to get. Is it on the Git repository, customizations, etc., etc. For it to work, you have to use the Teams notification and also a provider. So in this case, you give it you provide you give you select the type of the provider that you're going to use. As I mentioned, there are several kind of providers you can use. That is pretty much about it, about tenants. I think that is the most bit bigger part of it. For I study this one, I can say it's more currently I'm having more of dummies. Dummies, it's not having currently not really using it, but basically this is where you'll be able to define your infrastructure more like the cluster. In this case, you're considering the um, infrastructure, the cluster infrastructure that you're going to use. So we might have the something like Kivano, you have metric service. So Kivano assists with things with the policies within your cluster. You want to define the policies that for your applications or maybe even networks. You can use Kivano to do that. So that is basically the infrastructure, or maybe the setup that you'll use. If I go very quick to our application, so this is where you'll grant your developers access, or maybe those tenants access, depending with how you're structured again. So this is where you'll be having several application files. So you can have the service A, service B, QR, that are all supposed to be deployed to that particular cluster. All right. So without doing a lot of information overload, I can say I think that is it from my side, and that is, I will say thank you for listening to my presentation as I presented on managing your cluster deployments and infrastructure using GitOps. Thank you.